Hi Year 11, so here's another video for analysing texts for Paper 1 English Language. This time we're looking at The Handmaid's Tale, and we're going to focus on this text from a structural point of view. Okay, so we're thinking about structure. Now, you should already be thinking that means that you need to think about the beginning, the middle, and the end. You need to make sure that you're using quotations. You need to make sure that you're using subject terminology that's relevant to the structure question, and you need to be thinking about what changes and why, and you need to be thinking about what does the writer focus on and why. Okay, so at the beginning we're going to look at what's the writer focusing on and why, what changes and why, thinking about what terminology we can use, what quotations we can use, and then we're going to look at the beginning, and then we're going to look at the middle and then the end. We also need to make sure that we're kind of inferring as we go in terms of what we think is going on. And really, even just to get those first few marks, we almost just need to summarise, remember. So let's have a look. We're going to think about this sort of really long paragraph as the beginning. A group of people is coming towards us. They're tourists from Japan, it looks like, a trade delegation perhaps, on a tour of the historic landmarks or out for local colour. They're diminutive and neatly turned out. Each has his or her camera, his or her smile. They look around bright-eyed, cocking their heads to one side like robins, their very cheerfulness aggressive, and I can't help staring. It's been a long time since I've seen skirts that short on women. The skirts reach just below the knee, and the legs come out from beneath them, nearly naked in their thin stockings, blatant. The high-heeled shoes with their straps attached to the feet like delicate instruments of torture. The women teeter on their spiked feet, as if on stilts but off balance, and their backs arch at the waist, thrusting the buttocks out. Their heads are uncovered, and their hair too is exposed, in all its darkness and sexuality. They wear lipstick, red, outlining the deep cavities of their mouth, like scrawls on a washroom wall of the time before. So if we think, well, what is the writer focusing on? It's focusing on this group of tourists from Japan, okay, this group of people. So we can just mark that bit, or you can get a highlighter and do it better. This we know is the focus of the text. This group of people. And it starts off focusing on them sort of as a group generally, but then it starts to zoom in on the detail. So if we put a little note here, it zooms in on the detail. And we can just pick out some of the things that they're focusing on. So it focuses on their skirts, and then their stockings, and then the shoes. So it's almost like it scans down their body. And then sort of focuses in on their feet. And then it also focuses on their heads, their hair, and their lips and their lipstick. All right, so it sort of scans on them down their body and zooms in on sort of particular parts of the body. And the way the narrator is describing these people from Japan is this focus on the idea of it's quite sexualized. The skirts short, the nakedness of their legs. And the kind of shoes and things like that. So it zooms in on the detail. But also we get this sense that the narrator is quite shocked by it. She says, I can't help staring. So we write about the fact that the focus at the beginning here is this group of people from Japan, and the writer zooms in on the detail and scans down their body, and it's almost as if we're looking through the narrator's eyes here. So we see the tourists the way the narrator does. Sort of emphasizing what they're wearing from the way it zooms in on what they're wearing, emphasizing the way she feels about them. She seems to be quite shocked, so emphasizing this shock, and also this kind of like a fascination, like she can't really believe what they're wearing. And we can use this quotation here to back this up, this idea that she can't help staring, but it's very much a sort of a fascination with the physical way that they look, very much a focus on the physical things that they're wearing, and it's almost like, as the reader, we want to be kind of embarrassed by the way that they're exposed, so we can add that as well. The people seem exposed. It's almost embarrassing. Okay, so it's almost embarrassing the way that the way that she's describing them, but because we're seeing it the way the narrator does, that's also why it's so important that it's written in a first person narrative. So we've got this first person point of view, so we're seeing these tourists from the narrator's perspective. Okay, then it says, I stop walking. Offglen stops beside me, and I know that she cannot take her eyes off these women. We are fascinated, but also repelled. They seem undressed. It has taken so little time to change our minds about things like this. Now, there's this kind of an idea that these women, Offglen and the narrator, they used to dress like this, but they certainly don't dress like that anymore. So we've got our notes about the beginning. We don't need to write about this paragraph. We've got plenty to say just by focusing on this paragraph and the ideas here. Okay, so that would be what we're going to write for the beginning. And then if we look at the text on the page, we can actually see, even just by the way it looks, it's set out very differently here. So let's think about this bit as being our middle. Then I think, I used to dress like that. That was freedom. Westernized, they used to call it. And we can see a change here. And the writer actually signals the change for us when it says, then I think. So the narrator is now not thinking about the Japanese tourists and looking at them. It kind of goes internal. So the focus shifts to the narrator herself. And it's also, rather than like her outward looking, it's now this kind of internalized focus on thoughts. So we can also put here, it's an internal focus. It's focusing on her thoughts. And this allows us to see inside the narrator's mind almost. And what's also interesting here from a structural point of view, we're not talking about the language, but we're using these words to notice that there's been also a shift to the past tense. So when we see inside the narrator's mind, we're getting really her memories and her reflection, really. But she says, then I think, I used to dress like that. That was freedom. Westernized, they used to call it. And there's almost really a suggestion here that, she used to be like this, but things have changed. So the reader's left with a question really here. Is the reader wonders what has changed. And this shift creates a sense of intrigue to a certain extent, like we don't know what's going on and we want to know what has changed. Remember, we don't want to make those vague comments like the reader wants to read on, or we get a picture in the reader's mind, or it makes the reader think. We want to say, it makes the reader think. That's what reader wonder means. Makes the reader think. What has changed for the narrator is then being much more specific. Okay, and in terms of the tone here, the fact that she used to dress like that, if we think about what she was saying here about these women, and then she realizes that she used to dress like that, there's almost again a sense of shame, or again this kind of embarrassment at the realization that she was like that. Okay, so let's read the next bit. The Japanese tourists come towards us, twittering, and we turn our heads away too late. Our faces have been seen. So if this first bit was about the Japanese tourists, and then this bit here is about the narrator, then we see the two groups come together, or the narrator and her friend Ofglen, I should say. So we've got the Japanese tourists, and then we've got we and us. We've got the other group. And we've almost got kind of like a climax here, where the two contrasting groups meet. And then she focuses on the interpreter, okay? So again, she goes from sort of focusing on both groups here, both groups coming together. So again, let's just make our notes here so it's really clear. The focus here is on both groups. And then the focus is on the interpreter. So the focus shifts onto an individual. And again, we get a description of the interpreter. I don't want to go into too much detail here because we're going to write about this bit for our beginning. We're going to write this bit about our middle. So we really only need to then write about the end. New paragraph, we get a new paragraph here because we suddenly get some dialogue. And this is the first bit of dialogue that we've had after all this description. So as well as thinking about the focus, you know, what the writer is writing about, we can look at how the writer is writing. So this is still the interpreter. So the focus is still on the interpreter, but we've gone from description here, and then it moves to dialogue. And this dialogue kind of brings the two contrasting groups closer together because this interpreter is now speaking to them directly. I look down at the sidewalk, shake my head for no. What they must see is that the white wings only, a scrap of face, my chin, and part of my mouth, not the eyes. I know better than to look the interpreter in the face. Most of the interpreters are eyes, or so it's said. I also know better than to say yes. Modesty is invisibility, said Aunt Lydia. Never forget it. To be seen is to be. Her voice trembled, penetrated. What you must be, girls, is impenetrable. She calls us girls. So if we move it up, we've then got the last bit. Beside me, Ofglen is also silent. She's tucked her red-gloved hands up into her sleeves to hide them. The interpreter turns back to the group, chatters at them in staccato. I know what he'll be saying. I know the line. He'll be telling them that the women here have different customs, that to stare at them through the lens of a camera is for them an experience of violation. Now there seems to be a lot there that we maybe are confused about because we've only got this extract from the book. But let's go back and again start thinking about the focus. So the focus here is on the individual, it's on the interpreter. In those two paragraphs, and then towards the end the focus then returns back to the narrator. So we can then put here focus returns to the narrator. So what's interesting here is we start with the tourists, then we go to the narrator, then we go to both of them together, then we go to the interpreter, and then we go back to the narrator, and then we go back to the interpreter at the end. So the writer continuously or continuously switches between the narrator and the interpreter or the tourists. And this constant change in focus, it's almost like it's sort of flicking back and forth. And that sets the idea up that these, it's almost like they're two opposing sides. So it kind of highlights their differences. And that's what this section is all about, isn't it? That even from the beginning, one side is this sort of very sexualized description, and then the narrator can't really comprehend that anymore, and then the interpreter wants to take a picture and they don't want that to happen. So we've got this two kind of different groups that are very culturally different, and they don't seem to really be able to understand each other. So at the end, again, it flips back to the interpreter again, and it turns back to the group and he chatters to them. Now, although the focus is on the interpreter, this is still very much from the narrator's point of view. So it's saying, I know what he'll be saying, I know the line. He'll be telling them that the women here have different customs, and to stare at them through the lens of the camera is for them an experience of violation. So whilst the focus is on the interpreter and what he's saying to the tourists, we get the sense from that. So what we can infer is this has happened before. And what we're really inferring is the narrator seems to be able to predict what is going on. So it's still very much from her point of view. So you can add that to finish, okay? That it's still very much her point of view. So the bits in that you've highlighted are the possible quotations that you might want to use. You might also want to use at the end, I know what he'll be saying, or I know the line. Either of those would be great. And then you would basically write about this bit here, and then you would write about this bit here. So you can even put a B here for the beginning. This bit's going to be your middle, and then the point that you're going to write about at the end is the kind of switching between the two sides. So here, this way you're going to write, from here onwards is where you're going to write about the end. All right, and that gives you kind of structure of what it is that you need to say. And if we go back to what we were saying we wanted to do at the beginning, we've written about the beginning, middle and end. We've identified our quotations. We've got some terminology in terms of talking about point of view and zooming in, and what the focus shifts to, and we've looked at what they're focusing on and why, and what changes and why, and we've made some inferences. So we've got everything that we need in order to get a really good grade. So that's all you need to do. What you can do is almost start making notes about what you would write in each paragraph if you want to be really prepared for the lesson. All right, thanks for listening and watching.